Facility Advisory Board meeting for June 15th, 2023. Christina, can you please call the roll?
Steve McLucky.
Present.
Michael Talcott.
Here.
David McDowell. Sherry Tyndall. Here. Anthony Jermita.
Here.
Les Boatwright.
Here.
Okay, first thing on our agenda is approval of the minutes from May 18th. If somebody would like to make a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion, we approve the minutes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
To really dive strategically, focusing in on things and not just trying to roll through them. But nothing as a concern overall in the water department. Just that particular line item is the only thing that I noticed, and penalties. Again, and penalties is a budget thing. It's kind of been budgeted the same year after year after year. While the bills go up, the penalties proportionally increase, and that budget probably should have been increased over the last few years, and it just hasn't. So the fact that we're not that much over what was last year, but we are over budget. So again, some of these things need to be revised on the budget side so that variance will go away as well. But I don't know if you guys had any questions or.
Does anybody have any questions? Hearing none. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, I do have a question. Were you able to find out anything more about those studies?
I was not. In the finance department files, there was nothing in the finance department files. The copies of the studies aren't in there. Cost, contracts, none of that is in the finance department files.
Okay.
So I don't have access to everybody else's files, obviously, so I was not able to find anything.
Okay.
Chairman, I was able to speak with Goldman Sachs, so when we get down into that part of the discussion, I can fill you in on what I found out.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Harris. Appreciate it.
No problem.
That brings us to municipal services.
We don't have anything outlandish to report if you have questions for us. Otherwise, it's pretty much business as usual. I will, as far as an update with the lime stabilization, we have the hauling contractor. That contract is in place now and just working through the final permitting details through Department of Natural Resources. But contractor's in place and that process is up and running.
Outstanding.
I have a question for her.
Yes, go ahead.
Last month we discussed when you might be ready for touring, for us to come see the.
You are welcome at this point to come see it anytime you'd like.
All right. Is summer the best time?
Depends on your sense of smell.
Maybe September would be a good thing.
Sure.
Thanks.
Whenever is convenient, you're welcome out.
Maybe we should try to get a group and all go.
3 at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, appreciate it. Water Department, Q&A regarding the new payment platform website. This was requested by Mr. McLucky. Would you like to?
I don't have any other questions to ask. I want to just thank Dan for the quick response and complete responses and really working with me. I know we all got that here. So if you have an update or anything to say, take it away, I'd say.
The only thing I would add to that is skip to after the 10th question, and I'd responded to those, and you all have those. I won't go through them line by line, but just the main thing is if you've paid a fee in the past, you'll pay less of a fee with the new fees that are structures. But if you didn't pay, like in your case and in my case, I use an ACH, so it comes right out of the bank. There's no fee; it just automatically does it. Same way with if you're using your bank to pay your bills, it's the same way. It didn't change. If we would have led with that, we might have, ceased to have a lot of these questions. But I talked to you about signing up. You'd done it the same way. I have never been a customer of that. I went out and signed up also just to be a customer, even though my system is the way it is. I just wanted to find out what people were dealing with. And so I think the only trick I had was I tried to put my full name in there, and it only wants like couple letters of your name if you have your account number. So that's the only problem I had with it. But I could answer any questions that you might have. But I do appreciate the questions you asked, and I answered them, and hopefully everybody could understand what was going on.
Yeah, the only thing I have to say, because this came in the bill, a letter explaining the transition. My mother was convinced that this was a totally different system, and I think that's where a lot of people were getting confused. And I guess the way I understand it, we just changed the payment website.
Correct.
So
and I think it's like really near the bottom of it is where it really.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people were just convinced that the whole system had changed.
Yeah, I think there was some information out on the internet that we had changed a complete new billing system, and that just compounded things and, compared it to the old system. And that was just misinformation, misguided at best. So anyway.
Right. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Montgomery? Or do you have? Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
that's okay. Just real quick. So, Mr. Montgomery, so when this was looked at to find the company to go with, I noticed it was the finance department, tech services, and so forth. Does IPL have any major to do with this? Anything major to do with?
So that'd be something in the finance department that they'd bid out, take proposals on to get the rate that they were going to have. So I would say everybody does, but like Power and Light, Water and Sewer, it's just the mechanism of how they pay, but it's also how you pay. You could pay other bills in the city or whatever.
Right.
So it wasn't something that any of us would select, or we're part of the process. Yes. So.
Right. Okay, and I appreciate that because I wanna kind of make a point, because it's going to come out in some of my stuff later, that it's like we're getting a lot of all these examiners and these articles coming out that are skewing all the negative, making IPL look negative, and it's quite to the contrary. And so that's what I want to make sure that I make a point that we're not everybody's dogpiling on IPL. Sure.
Yeah, if I may, to clarify, I've heard it referenced as, the IPL bill. No, this is the city's utility bill. This is a payment mechanism people can use to pay their utility bill as well as other things. So it's not an IPL bill, it's the city's utility bill, which includes 3 utilities. Right. Yes.
Right. Thanks. I appreciate that. That's all.
I think there's a lot of confusion because it does, it's administered out of the water department. So as far as the building, so they take a lot of heat. Yeah, it's a major portion of the bill, but that's where it ends. A lot of the questions, it is because it's the major portion of the bill is why we get a lot of the questions. But wastewater, water, power and light, so it's all part of the bill.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I want to make sure that that's kind of emphasized, because these couple of articles that I'm going to address later are just like filled with IPL. It's their fault. It's their fault. So thank you.
If I could add one more thing real quick.
Sure.
So, I've been with the city for close to 5 years now. And one of the consistent pieces of feedback I've received since I've been here is the previous payment processor and the concerns and the expense with that. So, this was a key objective for quite some time once that contract ended to rebid this. And, it's somewhat unfortunate some of the negative feedback that has been we've received about this. But at the end of the day, our customers are saving money, which was a key objective here. And I think that's important. As Dan pointed out, if you were paying a fee before, you're paying less fee now. And if you weren't paying anything, you still aren't paying anything. So
It seems like the negative is always louder than the positive.
Well, I'm sorry, one more thing.
Sure.
And in response to that, so when they bid these out, I'm sorry. When they bid these out, do they look at, are reviews looked at, or it just seems like this time around, I noticed that some of the comments have been that they didn't finish getting everything loaded from the old customer, the database, thanks. From the old customer database to the new one before they rolled out. So that would be like a question I would have. Why did they roll it out before everything was complete?
because the contract ended with the previous.
Oh, so they had to.
Yeah, there was a timeline and a deadline that had to be met, and so I know that's a key concern our customers have right now, and that's the number one priority is to be able to access that historical billing information. So
Okay.
I think there's a lot of,
I would say too, anytime we do a public, anytime we do a competitive selection process, it's a multiple steps involved, including references and track record with other municipalities. So there's
Okay.
a pretty robust process that we go through, and there's also limitations on sometimes with technology on how those systems interact with our current system. So there's sometimes a limit in the pool of people entities that can be used just because of all the technology we already have in place.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
I'll say one thing. Again, just to be clear, the data which is maintained in our billing system didn't change. Our billing system didn't change. What changed is who we are using to process the payments. And the problem with the historical information is an imaging issue and a communication between softwares for the images of the bills with the new software. So it's there. There's just a communication issue between the two systems that they're trying to figure out.
So in other words, the people, the customers in the one database, since they didn't all, I guess that's a process, right? Where you take all the people from the old database and move them to the new one?
The database is the same.
Just images.
Oh, okay.
Just the images.
Okay.
So currently what it is you can go out, like I pulled mine up and I can see my current bill, but I can't see the past bills. Now granted, I was never looking at this before because I wasn't an electronic billing or anything like that. But a lot of people went out because they got that in their bill, went out and said, okay, I need to set up this. Well, you don't really need to. I mean, Mr. McLucky, he signed up for it, and whether he needed to look at the history or not in the past, he wasn't looking at it. He was just looking at his bill or whatever came to his house. So a lot of folks have now signed up for it, which is a fine thing. And in the future, they're all being loaded. They think that they'll have 90% of them by Friday, but I'm not going to promise that because I don't know how that's going to work. But that's what the goal is, and hopefully we'll get those all loaded and get the history in there. In the future, you'll have more information than you had in the past, and especially in my case where I was never looking at the history anyway. I was just looking at my bill that showed up, and that's how I was. And the bills have what happens a year ago, so you can kind of look at what your same usage a year ago at that time to kind of get a feel. And I just want to know, am I using more or less? And that's where I was. But anyway, probably said too much.
Anybody have any other questions on this topic? Mr. Montgomery, do you have anything else for us?
No,
Is this going to be your last meeting?
No, I'm here through July the 28th, so
Okay.
hopefully I'll have another PUAB meeting.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That brings us to IPL. First thing is end of contract for solar farm. That was requested by Mr. Talcott.
Okay. Okay. So my question with this end of contract with the solar farms, and it's probably not a big deal, but my question was what happens at the end of the contract? Who's responsible for the disposal of any solar panels? Do you have any? Yeah. Okay.
Based on the expected life of the equipment, which is 20 to 30 years, MC Power was granted a 30-year lease on the property and a 25-year contract for delivering power. That gives them, a couple of years from when the lease started to build it and get it into operation, and then a couple of years on the other end to decide what they're going to do. But they own and operate the equipment. All of that solar panel infrastructure, they own it.
Okay.
So as we near the end of the contract, we'll have to review with them what the life expectancy is, how is it performing, is there an intention to continue the contract or end the contract, and then it would be their responsibility to take care of that, of restoring that site.
Okay.
After 7 years of operation, which would be 2025, after 7 years of commercial operation, we have an option to buy them out. We're not really sure what that means. The language in the contract says a third party would have to come in and assess the value based on all elements of the contract being in effect for the life of the contract. So what does that mean? Does that mean the value of the power they could have expected to sell over the life of the contract? The profits they could have expected? Not really sure, but if we were just to decide that we wanted to buy them out, then we would have to approach them and negotiate that and get a third-party assessment. Nothing in the contract would stop them from offering to sell it to us now. In fact, we've had discussions with them in the past, and they hinted that they might want to do that. We said, fine, make us an offer. That was the last we heard from them. So not sure what their intention is there, but we've got the 25-year contract to buy power, 30-year lease. again, they own and operate the system, so it would be their responsibility to restore the property.
Okay, and that the reason for asking that question is because some of the research that I've been doing has been finding that it's not just you just take these to the dump. They've got the cadmium and all that stuff in them. You have to take them to special hazardous waste dumps. They have to be wrapped individually and all that, and that's horribly expensive. So that's my question. So thank you, appreciate that.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions on this topic? Hearing none, we'll move on. Municipal electric rate. This was also requested by Mr. Talcott. So,
On this one, my question is, now that the council has voted the 6% to come back to the 2012 rates, my thinking is that it's only fair that the municipal rate gets dropped also. Now, I understand this is a council thing. This is a decision that has to be made by council. But my question is, because according to the both the charter and the Bondurant decision, the city cannot benefit any more from the utility than the citizens. So that's my question, and I'm wondering what anybody here thinks as far as that goes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to hand out a legal opinion that we provided back in 2020 about the municipal rate, which indicates that the municipal rate is both compliant with the charter as well as the Bondurant decision.
Okay. Thank you.
thank you. Okay.
So the municipal rate is consistent with what was recommended in this legal opinion.
Does anybody else have any questions?
So by what it says in here, then in the third paragraph, the value of the power supplied to the city shall be calculated at the same rate as applied to other customers, which consume similar amounts of power. So can you explain to me what that's saying?
When we looked at the city as a single customer, if you included all the 100+ meters that are part of the city's account, they would be equivalent to one of our large industrial users as far as a volume. So what we did was we took the special interruptible rate, which is offered to our large industrial customers. We took, for an equivalent amount of power, how much the demand charge would be plus the usage charge, totaled that up, divided it by kilowatts, and came up with a price per kilowatt, so 8 cents. The large industrial user interruptible rate, they have their demand charge, which is how much we charge them to be able to deliver the maximum amount of power that they could use, and then the hourly or the kilowatt hour rate, which is for them is I believe 6 cents. So the 6 cents plus the demand, that averaged out to 8, and that's how we came up with the 8 cents.
Sure.
For comparison, does the school district get that rate? And I mean, are they one customer with all their buildings?
The school district, on the old rates, the school district is in a special school and church rate. And in the new rate design, it was decided to do away with that special rate and put them on large general service like another large customer.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Hearing none.
The on the Goldman Sachs report, I had lost me for a second. On the Goldman Sachs report, I was able to get in contact with one of the people who was on the original presentation, Joseph Natali. He is still with Goldman Sachs. Everybody else that was on that report is no longer with either Goldman Sachs or Stern Brothers. But I had a good conversation with him. That was not a study. There was no study involved. There was no exchange of information. They didn't come in and do a records dive or look into contracts. What they did was they took basically their best professional guess as to what a utility of our size might be worth. In the report, they list three different methods of that evaluation, and then gave a range of values, of potential values, and said, the value of the utility could be somewhere in here. They also mentioned that the outstanding bond debt would come off of that, which about 114 million. What was not included in that study, they said they made no attempt to. They did not look at things like our two coal contracts, our two wind farms, the solar farm. All of those contracts are with the City of Independence, not Independence Power and Light. So if the city were to make the decision to sell the utility, you still have these contracts that are an obligation. Nebraska City, for example, OPPD, Omaha Public Power District, our contract with them costs us in the range of $15 to $20 million a year. Obviously, that's not something that the city would want to continue. So in the negotiation of a sale, you would have to have come up with some way to resolve that contract. That'd be a three-way negotiation between us, OPPD, and who the potential buyer is. But that also is going to come off of. So let's say you have an average value of 300 million. What's been put out in the papers and such is that, the city would see this big cash infusion. Well, maybe not, because you have, let's say, 300 million. Now you take off the 114. Now you're going to have to take off millions of dollars to get out of this contract with OPPD, with MPUA, with Smoky Hills Wind Farm, Marshall Wind Farm, the solar farm. All those contracts will come right off of that 300 billion sale price. What was also not included, and they recommended that if we do go forward with a study, we needed to make sure we included these things. What's the impact on loggers and Staywell? The rates that we pay, the rates the city pays for loggers and Staywell are based on participation. You remove 175 employees, that's about 15% of the employee base. Could have an impact on the rates that are charged for those things. The direct costs don't change because right now all of those are being paid by IPL. All the benefit expenses for IPL personnel are paid by IPL funds. So that doesn't shift. But what could change is the rates that the city gets charged going forward when you remove that many people from the plan. Other things, any buyouts of personnel, if the buyer chose not to retain people when you had, a staff of 175 with, hundreds of hours of leave on the books, somebody's paying for that leave payout. Again, if the buyer is going to have to participate in that, that's coming off your sale price. So all these are issues that they were not included. This was just simply a high-level market type of look at the potential of a sale, and a lot of different details that would have to be included to really refine that to something meaningful.
Okay.
I will say, this was not commissioned by the city. It wasn't commissioned by IPL. It wasn't commissioned by finance. As part of the process of doing our bond reissuing, Goldman Sachs was working with our financial advisor, PFM, and in 2018, they offered this assessment up as just one piece of information for the city to consider. And since they were working with PFM again on the rebonding, they produced an update. But again, not a lot went into it, no data exchange or anything like that.
Okay. Well, that,
I've got a question.
Sure.
Real quick. Is it normal to do those contracts, we talked about the coal contracts with the city versus with IPL? Is that a normal?
I would have to say yes. I mean, not based on any experience, but the fact that 100% of our contracts are with the City of Independence rather than IPL. So to me, it would seem like that must be the normal practice, or at least it is for us.
It kind of surprised me. So when I heard this, okay, thank you.
anybody?
And just a couple of quick questions. So nothing was paid for it, right? Correct. Okay. And then it wasn't requested by anybody in particular, correct?
In fact, when I talked to Mr. Natale, he said a colleague of his in the finance and banking business had mentioned to him, hey, Independence is working on some bonds. This is back in 2017, 2018. You should reach out to them and offer some services. So it was basically kind of like a marketing attempt on them, a fishing expedition to see if they could interest us in some further business.
Okay.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a question on this, but it is IPL. We should do it now or later.
We can go. Are you kind of finished with? I mean, do you have anything else?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Yeah, go right ahead.
This relates to the city council meeting on the 5th. I don't know if you saw that. Council member asked about the reserve fund, and basically, I think I can summarize by saying he talked about it increases every year and we've never used it. And I think he was thinking maybe we can use that so that the customer cost doesn't go up as much. Could you just explain the rules on that reserve fund?
Sure.
Is it locked down for just the reserve fund? Can you use it for something else?
You have a couple of times you've heard people make comments about, well, we've never touched the reserves. That's a slight misperception of how that whole thing works. We have, in the past, we operated on a threshold of 67 days of operating cash. That's strictly $340,000 a day is about what it takes to run the operation. And so 67 times that. On top of that, we have mandatory debt reserves that we have to have on hand as part of our obligation on taking out those bonds. Those two things together are about 25 million. So we've had this threshold of 25 million. Our reserves are well above that and have been. Those reserves are used for any outstanding bills that may come in, fluctuations in the cost of electricity or fuel, late payments that come in that we have to cover. All of those different things, the reserves are there, and hopefully the reserves are built up so that we have capital funds available to do things like build a new substation. We have never dropped below that 25 million threshold. We most certainly have dipped into our reserves from year to year. Think of it as your checking and savings account. You operate out of your checking account. If you overdraw, you have to take money out of savings to balance that out. That's how our reserves work. We have our budgeted amount of money that we're using. Think of that as our checking account. Sometimes, due to whatever circumstances, the expenses overcome the revenue, and that difference comes off of our reserves. So instead of maybe we may have like 67 million in reserve. If we end up 3 million in the red, now we have 64 million. We never hit that threshold. And that may be what they were referring to, that we had never hit that 25 million, but we most certainly have been negative from year to year, depending on how the market runs and expenses and such.
So is the reserve fund governed? I mean, I know there are accounting rules, right? But is it governed by that, or could you use that money for something other than what you enumerated?
All of our expenditures must be approved by the city council.
Yes.
So I can't just decide one day that I'm going to take 5 million and put it over here
Right.
and use it for something else. All of that has to go through our process.
If I could add one thing real quick. So the cash reserve policies, it's called the cash balance and resiliency policies. Our utility financial advisor worked with us on developing those for all 3 utilities. We presented those to, before some of you all have been on this board, I think it was in 2021. That policy considers risk factors. Let's see here. You have revenue risk, expense risk, there's working capital and capital reserve. There's 4 components to that. Each year, those are recalibrated and evaluated and adjusted accordingly. These were developed kind of on the heels of and during COVID. So the revenue risk was much higher. As COVID risks have mitigated, those risk factors have been reduced. And so it fluctuates year to year based on the recommendations from our advisor, and those are then reflected in the budget. So it's not automatic that it grows. It grows. Sometimes they go down, but it's a combination of multiple factors that are analyzed, and then there's a target, a threshold that we need to be within. In the general fund, for instance, our target is 16%, but we're well below that target. In our utilities, we are, I believe, within the target for 2 of them, maybe all 3? All 3. All 3 right now. So if that helps.
The only other thing I would say is, and Jim mentioned this, there's bond covenants that have restrictions on how much has to be kept in reserves. You would never be able to take your reserves below those bond covenants, or that would be a serious problem. The way I used to explain it as an auditor is reserves aren't slush funds. They are savings accounts for long-term capital projects that are anticipated, that we know that are coming, whether they be 20 years down the road. It's like your savings account holds your replacement for your car whenever your car needs to be replaced, if that's how you operate. So it is a number, it is cash in the bank, but it's cash with a purpose.
Thank you. I had never thought about this, but it was mentioned at the council meeting. I just thought it was worth getting it straight. Thanks.
Just a little bit to illustrate the value of these policies. I can't remember the year. It was in, I think, 2021. We did a refinancing for the water department bond funds. And we got an upgrade during that process. And one of the factors that the bond rating agencies mentioned was our strong cash balance and resiliency policies. So they can be a real asset for us from a financial perspective.
As long as you follow.
I have one more IPL question. Sorry. I just want an explanation for the board here, clarity on the rate increase or removal of the decrease, from your perspective, the timing and so forth.
Right now, we're targeting it for October. The reason for that is when the new rates were approved in 2020, one of the council members made an amendment to their resolution to sunset all the old rates in 3 years, which is October. So in order to help smooth the transition in the original rollout, we grandfathered anyone that wanted to stay on their rates, and we just moved new customers to the new rates. All of that goes away in October. So rather than have a change and then another change, our target is to do it all at once in October.
Thank you.
Mr. Tom?
I'm good.
Oh, okay. All right. Anybody have anything else? Thank you, Mr. Nail. Appreciate it. Deputy City Manager, Mr. Norris, do you have anything?
Just one thing to follow up on Jim's comments. We're already, even starting this week, we're starting to develop a communications plan and a game plan for how we roll out these changes to the rates that will be coming in October. So we're going to be well ahead of the curve and communicate well in advance of what changes are going to be occurring.
I think that would be great, because if we could avoid the same problem that we had with the changing of the bill, I think that would be great. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Norris? Thank you very much. That brings us to board member comments. Does anybody have anything they want to say?
I've got one.
Sure.
It's really just a question. I'm not sure who to direct it to. I've seen Spire doing a lot of work, or a contractor for Spire digging a lot of holes around town. Are they looking for a ship, or are they?
They're replacing just a lot of their mains through town. That does go through municipal services right away permit processing. Was just actually talking to Adam about it earlier today. We're trying to limit the size of excavations and that they can just leave open now, because that's been a problem in the past. But yes, they're tearing through town at quite a rate.
Yeah, out in Nolan Estates, out where I live, they've been out there for the last month, I think, with holes all over the place. Steel plates laying off to the side, the hole gets left open, they go home for the weekend. And I'm thinking that steel plate's really doing good job on that grass. It's not over the hole, or they'll park a piece of equipment over the hole and then come back on Monday and it's decided to go down in the hole. So there's been a lot of good safety practices I've noticed, taken note of, but I just was curious as to what they were doing, because
Main replacements.
I know one spot out on Holkey Road, it's been dug up and after they laid new pavement, they've come back in 3 times and dug big holes in it. And just keep doing that. So, all right, I appreciate it.
Is that what's going on down on Truman Road too? Kind of like, I don't know, it might be Truman and Elizabeth Ann. There's that.
AT&T is doing some work.
Maybe
also,
it's AT&T.
Between Spire and AT&T.
Yeah, I saw they had yellow pipe, maybe yay big, that they're putting in the ground out there, and I'm not sure. I have never seen like a city truck or Spire, so I don't know who's doing it.
Yeah, and you can
kinda
actually,
got that area a mess.
Dan just mentioned it, you can look on DigRight's website and find out anytime at any location, as long as they've called for locates, you can find out who's doing that work.
I noticed this morning they had USIC out there flagging stuff further to the west, so I assume they're about to move. Okay. Anybody have anything else?
Yeah, if everybody's. Okay. What I'm gonna say is it's in kind of response. I mean, it's in kind of concert with the articles that came out, and I really felt that it was necessary to at least kind of put it out in the light, because again, I'm hearing nothing but negative about IPL. And I think we're way far from that. And I think we need to hear more positive about IPL. And we had the opinion piece that first came out in the Examiner from this Mr. Stokes, who's with the Show Me Institute, which is a big think tank out in St. Louis. He was not only calling or encouraging sale of IPL, the utility, but also the water. And I'm thinking, we've got the best water, some of the best water around, and we don't want that going to a for-profit agency. A lot of times when these things come up, a think tank just doesn't come from the other side of the state and just decide we're going to put this big old article in here. I mean, think tanks make money, and usually think tanks respond to somebody's request. So again, and that's coming from the sourcewatch.org. His opinion piece claims that we do not charge lower electric rates than private companies or for-profit companies. But the 22 Goldman Sachs report said that if we sold IPL, our rates could be as much as 30% higher. Evergy was asking for a 12% increase last April. And Fox 4 KC was recently reporting or doing their article on summer bills for Evergy could be as high as 60%. So again, this all kind of goes back to municipality versus a for-profit. It claimed that for-profit companies are generally more efficient than municipal utilities, but I don't think they've looked into IPL's efficiency record. He didn't mention IPL's 2 recent national awards, the Safety Excellence Award for safe operation practices in 22 and a Diamond Reliability Public Provider RP3 designation, the highest possible ranking, which I understand IPL now has held this for 10 years, roughly.
We're in our third round, 3 years, so
Right.
this will be 9
Okay.
years.
So close. Okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. It seems that the goal to simply get a one-time cash infusion to the city. I know the city has some special projects they'd like to fund, but Mr. Stokes didn't mention that some cities have sold their water departments, now regret it and are trying to buy them back. Cities like San Francisco and Boulder, Colorado have tried to buy back their electric utilities and failed. Once they're gone, they're gone. And again, I know I'm beating the dead horse, but I think this is an important dead horse to beat because we need to get more positive out there about IPL. Then on June 10th, the Examiner put out an article on the utility bill shift causing headaches with its clunky rollout. In my opinion, the article is slanted as though this rollout was IPL's fault. First, the water department, not IPL, is in charge of the billing, correct? And this is where things are. Secondly, the city staff chose the new billing company, not IPL, and we've already answered that. And Mr. Walker was quoted about having conversations with Jim Nail about getting communications out, but I thought Dan Montgomery was in charge of billing, which he is. So that didn't make a lot of sense. Mr. Schondelmeyer from Indie Energy is quoted as saying in part that such a change are particularly troublesome coming from a municipal and not a private entity, and since Independence utility customers are not customers by choice. Now, my understanding is utility companies are by nature a monopoly, right? You can't go and we can't have some people in the city deciding, well, I'd rather have Evergy or I'd rather have somebody else. And then, so basically, my point on this is surely somebody from Indie Energy should have known that that wasn't the issue, that there's no place where you can have your choice. So again, in my opinion, there appears to be a concerted effort to put IPL in a negative light ahead of the vote to sell IPL. This is why I think it's important to give Independence voters and ratepayers both sides of the story to make sure that they're getting, if they're getting 100% of the negative, they need to have 100% of the positive also. And I don't think they get enough of that out. So anyway, the only last thing I have to ask is, Mr. Nail, have you had a chance to see if MPUA was going to be able to do any kind of a presentation for us?
And just right after the last meeting, I reached out to John Twitty, and this month, in fact, today is their board meeting, so he couldn't make it this month, but he is on track right now to attend in July.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for all your hard work.
Does anybody else have anything? Well, they're going to think that you and I sat and did this together because I read the same article.
Oh, did you?
I would like to basically reiterate everything that you just said, but this was, I sat down the other night, and just kind of, as I read the article, I got more upset. And I will try not to get upset reading this, but when I wrote this, I was pretty mad. I read the op-ed in the Examiner on June 3rd, 2023 by Mr. David Stokes of the Show Me Institute. After reading his piece, it seems to me he has questionable data at best and has portrayed independent utilities in an unfair light that I would like to talk about for a moment. Firstly, the Show Me Institute appears to be a think tank out of St. Louis. I don't know if this is just my Western Missouri bias or not, but whenever St. Louis tries to get involved in what's going on over here, I get suspicious. Mr. Stokes is listed as the Director of Municipal Policy, yet doesn't list any educational or previous work background that would lead one to say, oh, this person is an expert in utility management. Mr. Stokes mentions a 1994 study by two economists that studied private versus public gas utilities, a 29-year-old study. Now, it's been a little while since I was in college doing research for papers, but if I had turned in a paper arguing a point, and the most recent data I could find to back up my thesis was almost 30 years old, I don't think my professors would have thought much of my research methods. He also cites a, quote, recent comparison, end quote, of public versus private electric companies in Florida. How recent? Last year? 10 years? By the looks of his other research, it could be 1953 for all I know. And what works for Florida does not mean it's a one-size-fits-all fix for every municipality in the country. Look, we're going to have a lot of discussions about whether or not we should sell IPL. It is my opinion that this would be a bad deal for Independence and its residents, might even be dangerous. We are required by charter to provide utility services to the residents, and until the charter changes, that's the way it is. He also says that selling IPL doesn't go far enough. He suggests the sale of our water department as well. He gives reference to a BYU study from 2000 to prove his point, 23 years old. The only concrete number he provides is that Eureka, Missouri sold its water and sewer departments to a private company for $28 million, and that Independence would stand to make more than that since we're a bigger utility. Gee, thanks for the insight. If he can show me just one reason how selling the water department, getting rid of that line of revenue that the city receives in local rates, not to mention the water we provide, which we don't provide out of the goodness of our heart, but sell to other municipalities, lower the quality of the water we provide, award-winning tap water, and provide their service at a higher cost because they would be a for-profit corporation than we do right now, how that would be a benefit, I'll eat my hat. It seems his biggest argument for selling any of our utilities is that it would generate a cash flow to fund other, quote, vital city services, end quote. Yes, that money could go to police, fire, EMS, municipal services, parks, etc. But this is not a consistent cash flow. Once that money is gone, it is gone forever. We will no longer have that fiscal lifeline our utilities provide for the other city services. In all reality, I think the argument for or against selling our utilities boils down to one undeniable, indisputable fact. Let's say, hypothetically, we decide to sell IPL to Evergy. Evergy is beholden to one group and one group only, their shareholders. Because they're a monopoly, their ratepayers can get as mad about rates as they want, as mad about service outages or wait times or customer service as they want. But unless the shareholders become unhappy, there is no impetus for change. By the city owning its own utility, IPL is also beholden to one group and one group only, their shareholders. Only in this instance, every ratepayer is a shareholder. Every employee of IPL or the water department is a shareholder. Every resident of Independence is a shareholder. If someone has a problem, they don't have to go through some corporate monster. They come to us. Is our system perfect? No, not by a long shot. Is there room for improvement in the way our utilities operate? I think everyone in this room right now would say most assuredly yes. Should we dump a service we provide to the ratepayers and citizens of Independence? Absolutely not. And that's all I have to say. So if anybody else has anything else. Our next meeting is July 20th, 2023. And I was asked to remind everybody at that meeting, we will vote for chair and vice chair. So with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.